Not the famous Kara Swisher, I'm so sorry. I don't know how many of us were around for Scott Galloway's talk this morning, his kind of ode to Jesus Jobs. But remember, he quickly went through all these non-big things. And he said VR, not a big thing. And then he said IoT, Internet of Things, not a big thing. And I thought, OK, well, our 45 minutes are basically pointless then. But I guess the three gentlemen to my left will strongly disagree with him. That our future of connected devices and sensors and embedded technology will, in fact, bring not just the Internet of Things, but a fundamental shift in how we operate business. And I think Carlo is actually going to demonstrate with what is a fascinating shift in the transportation industry.
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. Great pleasure to be back here at DLD. Can we have the slides? What I wanted to do is, just at the beginning, I was asked to share in a very concrete way some examples of how we can use big data, analyze big data in cities. Is it OK? Yeah. Yes. So, what is this all about? Well, at the beginning of digital, people thought that digital would actually destroy our cities. People thought that digital was making all of our space more and more virtual. So much so that people thought, even cities might one day disappear. Well, no prediction could have been more wrong than this one. We know now that cities have been thriving over the past few years. We know that half of the world's population now lives in cities. And by 2030, this number could swell to 5 billion. So digital hasn't killed physical space, like people thought in the 90s, but actually digital and physical kind of recombining. They're creating this new hybrid dimension. Internet of Things, call it, is the internet entering into physical space. And it's really about collecting data, sensing the city, and responding to this information, almost as if every atom out there of our physical space were becoming both a sensor and an actuator. All of this, of course, produces an incredible amount of data. And I want to share with you just one example. I was asked to do this just to kick off the conversation. If you look at this, that's how you can look at the city today. Is the city of Lisbon. It's a visualization by Pedro Cruz, who was in our lab at MIT. This was at MoMA in New York at the Museum of Modern Art. It was looking at taxi data in the city in order to look at flows through all of the streets and look at all these kind of arteries that you couldn't really capture just a few years ago. Now, if you take this information, if you analyze it, you can then get exciting insights. And if you look at this, that's actually New York. You see taxi data in New York, every pickup in yellow and drop-off in blue. Here you see the airport in New York. You zoom out, you see all of Manhattan and the boroughs. And then you can ask yourself, what if people could actually share mobility? And if you look at that, between any 2 points in Manhattan, you got hundreds of thousands of trips connecting them. So what if people could actually share mobility more? In other terms, if you want to frame it in a mathematical way, you could say, what if I want to take everybody to destination when they need to be there? What would be, plus or minus a few minutes, 2 minutes, what would be the minimum number of cars I need? Well, again, if you've got big data, sometimes you need new mathematics in order to really understand what's going on. We try to solve the problem with something we call shareability network, using network science. You see here all the trips you can share in every node. And what you find is quite extraordinary is that actually in New York, you could take out 40% of the vehicles in the city and still take everybody to destination exactly when they need to be there, without any delays on the system. The other thing that's exciting, and here, we started this research 2-3 years ago. The first results came to the attention of Uber, and as you know, Uber Pool does exactly this. We started collaborating with Uber since then, and it's really about the idea of how you can share mobility in a more effective way in cities. And I believe that Uber Pool now accounts for 50% of all trips in San Francisco. Now, if you look then a few years down the line, something like this will happen. A lot of self-driving. We heard about it in the previous presentation. We'll hear about it in the next presentation. And this is what a self-driving car sees, scanning the environment in 3 dimensions. And the exciting thing for us is not that you don't need to keep your hands on the steering wheel. The exciting thing for us for self-driving is another one, is the fact that the car can give you a lift in the morning when you go to your office, and then can give a lift to somebody else in your family, or to anybody else in the city. So effectively, you're blurring private transportation and public transportation. Now, if you combine both things, what we saw before about sharing the ride, with actually the ability of sharing the car that will happen with self-driving, we could actually theoretically run a city, such as Munich or New York or Singapore, big city or small city, with 20% of the cars we have today. And that's what I want to finish with. That's an example of how you can get a lot of the data out there in the city, analyze it, how this can help us to run mobility in a different way. We can also look, and we'll talk about many other dimensions in today's panel, and how this potentially can have dramatic changes in the way we move in the city. Thanks.
It's obviously not as easy for Uber to do that, say, in Europe, which we'll probably get to later. But I mean, the key thing with IoT and this possibility is that there's going to be a lot of connectivity. And Thorsten, I'm curious, like where you see the telecommunication industry moving, what role you're going to play in this future.
To be honest, if you look at what we provide as telecoms already today, you've seen what we call it mobility insights. It's all the traffic information about people, how they move through cities. So to help smart cities, to help city planners, but also more planning and to make it even more efficient. I think clearly, if you look at telcos, for us today, the raw material that we deliver is data connectivity, basically. And we have to expand our business model. We have to transform our business model. We have to become also a provider of data and data insights. We just announced that we will set up a new business unit called Advanced Data Analytics. So we're talking about data that we already have, and then we will have even more in the future when we see all the IoT devices connected to our network.
Can you give an example, and what does that mean? Advanced data analytics, kind of tangibly.
Yeah, advanced data analytics means that we learn out of the data that we have, the user, the usage. Of course, for example, we were the first to have a certificate of the German data privacy authorities to provide anonymous data and to use this to provide these mobility insights. I think this is an important issue. We are using this data already. We are selling it to customers. As I said, also Munich here is using the data to optimize traffic flows to the cities. Just an example. But of course, we are also using it here. We have, I think it's the only one in the world still, and the first in the world. We have I call it a test track for self-driving cars here on the A9 from Munich to Nuremberg, and we also use these data to have the first trials for self-driving cars here in Germany.
Are you working with an OEM partner out there? Is BMW? Do you have an OEM you're partnering with?
Yeah, we work not only with BMW, we work also with Audi, and we also work with Daimler and also some other car manufacturers who wants to use our network that we provide on this test track.
So in some ways, I think the next evolution of big data may be artificial intelligence, and Antoine's company is kind of one of the cutting edge of AI and deep learning. I'm fascinated because the first space that you moved into is something that a lot of AI companies have not done, as far as I know AI companies have done, which is finance. So why finance?
So when we started this project 8 years ago, our idea was data would explode, but especially dimensionality of data would explode. So people would collect all kinds of data that they had never collected before. And so where AI or machine learning had been applied in the past, in trading, for example, was in high-frequency trading, where the dimensionality of the data is very narrow. So when you operate at less than 10 milliseconds, the amount of the world that you can look in that 10 milliseconds is very, very small. When you look at minutes, hours, or days, you have to look at much more of the world, and you have to sense much more of the world, and you have to build a system that's much more ambitious in nature. And that was our goal, to build such a system. And fast forward to now, we've got an immensely scalable system, 4,000 sites around the world, 2 million CPUs, 5,000 GPU cards, and apply it to trading successfully gets us to tackle an enormously complex problem, dynamic in nature, so it's AI, but evolving, adaptable AI. And as you can imagine, in a success case, that's very lucrative, and we can apply this to develop more businesses on top of our platform, which we started to do last year.
Have you ever done kind of like a Gary Kasparov versus Watson, like a hedge fund guy versus your machines trading?
Yeah, and the difference is historically, trading and investing has been using machine learning to optimize an entry point and an exit point, but the strategy was a human design strategy. What we're doing is very different. We're saying, hey, here's the world, and let the system evolve its own strategies from A to Z, including the entry point, the exit point, the asset, the order to enter, the portfolio allocation. Everything is self-evolved by the machine and executed by the machine.
Yeah, machine learning is certainly like in vogue now in the Valley, and they always talk about potential to take this technology to every single sector, right? And like software is eating the world, machine learning is maybe eating the world. You're doing, I think, is interesting work on sewage. And it could have, what is big data and sewage? Tell us about that project.
Yeah, and I think, what we've been hearing is that really you can apply the data component, you can analyze data to look at so many dimensions of the city. So it's about, mobility, it's about finance, about in the city, it's about energy, it's about waste. And yes, with sewage, we're doing a project now called Underworlds. I think you're all familiar with the microbiome. The microbiome is that in all of our bodies, for every cell in our bodies, we got around 9 or 10 viruses and bacteria living with us. And the microbiome has been studied just in recent years because now we got the genetic techniques in order to look at the microbiome. And the microbiome seems to be correlated with many, many important health facts about our body. So it wasn't really very clear before, but now we know that this kind of ecosystem of viruses and bacteria says a lot about our bodies. Well, today we cannot yet monitor the microbiome at an individual level in our homes. We cannot yet. It's too difficult, too expensive, and so on. But what we can do it at an aggregated level. And so guess what? In the city, there's something that's a beautiful aggregator of all of our microbiomes, and it is actually sewage. So if you go into sewage and you take samples of sewage, and if you look at viruses and bacteria there, then you can actually detect many interesting things. And out of those things, we're looking at epidemics before they happen. So you can actually look at the influenza virus in the sewage before people report the influenza. You can look at other things. You can also look at biomarker. When you look at that, you know if a neighborhood has a certain obesity rate or diabetes rate. So it becomes a very powerful tool in order to really understand something about the health of our community. We cannot do it yet. Tomorrow we'll be able to do it at the individual level, but today we can do it at kind of the aggregated level.
Is there any privacy? Is anyone going to say, like, that's my microbiomes that you're
It's a great question. We are working with the ethical review board at MIT. We're looking at good aggregation in the city. Who owns the data into sewage? That's new territory. But yes, there's something you want to be careful about.
Who owns the shit?
And of course, we're looking at data on the MIT campus, on the Harvard campus. We can see if there's more cocaine consumption on one place or the other. So I think that there's things that they could become quite sensitive very quickly. So
yeah, that's a good. Where's the highest cocaine concentration? This is actually like I was going to turn into data and privacy. I think coming to Europe, there's a term here that Telefonica uses called digital self-determination, which I admit it was foreign to me, and maybe it's just being a naive American. But can you explain that to me? What's the how do you look at that and your relationship to your consumers and their data?
Of course, I think especially in Germany, but also in Europe, and I think more and more also in the US, when consumers talk about big data, they have some concerns. And I think as an industry, we have to address these concerns. And the way we want to do this is by what we call self-determination. We want to give back, we want to give back the data to the customers. The customers, normally we, and by the way, we all signed the agreements with Apple, with Google, with YouTube, with all these big internet players, and basically, I think nobody ever read this. So
we don't
don't know what they store.
With Google.
You don't know what data they have, and basically, they don't want you to know what data they have. So what we want to do is to give you your data back, to give you your rights about the data back, and this is what we call the self-determination. It means you have full transparency what data we have about you, and you have full control about the data, because you can tell us what you want that we can do with your data. So this is what we talk about when we talk about self-determination.
I mean, is that regulated? Is that you have to do that here in Germany, or is that a preemptive measure?
I think it's not. No, it's not regulated. By the way, we have a data privacy regulation now for the whole of Europe. It was just announced from the EU Commission before Christmas. So no longer we have 28 different data privacy laws in Europe. We have just one, and it's applicable as of next year. So it has to be installed in all 28 member states this year. This is one thing. I think we need to go a step further. We need also the discussion with the consumers about what I would call the ethical use of data to really address their concerns.
Yeah, Antoine,
can I ask a question actually? Because I think people have been talking about this, about the fact that basically the consumer has the power then to decide, but easily then quickly that becomes a very complex system. Imagine you need to have an agreement and decide with Telefonica what you share, what you don't share. You need to do the same with every credit card you have. So easily can become quite a difficult system, and I think that's why this idea has been floating around for several years, but we haven't seen many concrete examples. Can I ask you something? What if otherwise, what if we were to make everything transparent? So everybody knows everything about everybody else. Do you think that could be an option as well?
Could be. I think that's the other extreme. I don't think that it will ever happen because people don't tend to give everything, or want to make everything very, very transparent so that everybody knows everything about me. I think people really want to decide what data, especially here in Europe, and that's maybe a little bit different than in the US. People want to decide about their own data, and they want to have control about their own data. I think this is something that we have to address because it's an important part of our culture.
do you think that puts you in a disadvantage against US companies, internet companies that aren't doing that? I mean, you mentioned Google, but I don't. In the States, never do I have to click a button that says.
But because if you look at what is happening today, yes, you're sharing your data with the likes of Google and many others, and you're sharing all the data. So that produces an incredible asymmetry. So wouldn't it be better if you're sharing with Google, then why not to share it with anybody else? And at least you remove that asymmetry from society that creates monopolies and creates many other bad things. And if you look at that, people went back to look at. Anthropologists went back to look at how we used to live a few thousand years ago, when all of us here in Munich would be hunter and gatherers, all over the world would be hunter and gatherers. And hunter-gatherer societies where privacy didn't have the concept of privacy. Everybody was shared inside the group. So I think I wonder if that's still a better solution than what we have today, because we are sharing today, but creating all this huge asymmetry on who has it. Big companies, big states have access to what other people don't have.
I think, therefore, it's especially important that people know what data you have and how to control this data. I'll give you one example. For example, as you just said, with big data analysis, we can analyze health data, for example. So we can use anonymous data. We can analyze it, and the results, if we have the pattern, and then use this pattern, for example, to compare with your private data, we would be able to tell you that with this probability, you will get this or that disease. So of course, you have to decide if you want to know or not. So in the same way as you talk to your doctors today. So I think this is something where people want to be in control, and not just, Google is telling me that next week I will get ill.
Antoine, I wanted to turn curious about, you're doing some work in e-commerce that I think has a interesting perspective and kind of an approach to privacy, right? And
yeah, so I think part of the debate here is a bit misplaced, I think.
Okay.
In that I think so when I meet you, I don't need to know what you did yesterday, what people like you do, to have a meaningful discussion with you about anything, a purchase, an engagement, and conferences like this tell us that many of us do not know each other, but very, very quickly we engage into a meaningful discussion without knowing each other before. And so the rise of personal assistance, so the rise of intelligence within the data is critical here. So it all started with what we did 10 years ago, more now, with Siri. Siri doesn't need to know a lot about you. It just needs to ask you questions about what you want now.
But if you talk to Google, they'll say Siri is crap because it doesn't know, because it can't access the cloud and it doesn't know as much about as Google now would.
Siri is very powerful because it has the ability to understand your context. It resides on your handset. It uses the cloud to understand ontologies and taxonomies and derive knowledge. But it's in the interaction with the individual that becomes powerful. Mm-hmm. And it's just version 1. But when you go to version 2, version 3, and we deployed just last year something on a shoes.com e-commerce site where we have the user walk through, quote unquote, a store, and as you walk through the store changes because what you're looking at, what you're clicking on, completely tells the system that your current intent. So user's intent can be derived without knowing anything about user data, and I think that's critical going forward in terms of privacy.
Are you ever concerned that regulators would say that's terrifying artificial intelligence and we need to do something about that?
Yeah, I don't think it's terrifying. I think it's quite the opposite. I think it is healthy AI where you, as a user, you can actually decide what to expose, and the type of services you interact with is your problem, not the services problem.
Sorry, the type of
not
service?
The services problem. It is your problem.
Yeah.
Your prerogative.
Right. I mean, not to keep belaboring the point on the regulation side, but the EU Commissioner Vestager said yesterday what it sounded like, she was a little vague, but that she may be looking at big data as an antitrust issue. I mean, do you think that companies that collect and as you're moving more into data and IoT, is it a concern that'll be seen as viewed as anti-competitive?
As I said, I think we have to address this issue. It's not a part of regulation. It's privacy, and privacy has always been part of our culture. You just said it. It was 2,000 years ago, it was 100 years ago, and it's even more today. And it's even more today because we know more about each other, or we could know more about each other, and people still worried about their privacy and their data. So, and I think, therefore, we need to find ways. And for us, as I just explained, the way is self-determination. And just what you said, it's just one example. But you can think of, for example, self-driving cars. Tons of data that self-driving cars produce. First question, who owns this data? Yeah. Is it the driver, the owner, the car manufacturer, the infrastructure operator? Who owns the data? And there are a lot of discussions, and I think we have to face this discussion, and we have to do it very openly. And again, I call it an ethical debate. This is necessary to clarify everything, to make really data the raw material for the future, for the digital age.
Yeah, I love talking about robot cars.
Going to your question, I think it's completely an antitrust issue because of course if somebody has a lot of data, then there's a symmetry in society or a symmetry between companies. Then somebody has the power to do things that others don't do. So I think going back to your point, I think it is an antitrust issue. I also want to add something to...
That was Vestager's point.
Sorry?
That was the commissioner's point.
The commissioner's point, but I think the commissioner has a point in this case. And I wanted to get back to the previous point. I love the work that you're doing with artificial intelligence. I also think we need to be careful about something. And let me tell you, I think we want to make sure that what we do will actually make our life richer and not vice versa. I'm always terrified when people say, this little app will tell you what you want to do next. And I think, I think what I want to do is not really, I've bought 100 books. I don't want to have a piece of artificial intelligence tell me what is the next book I'm going to buy. I want a piece I want a system that will tell me what is the book I would. It is unpredictable that I would buy, but actually it will change my life. So I think, the beauty of serendipity is what we need to make sure is still there. Because all of artificial intelligence is looking at the past, is looking at patterns, is looking at the context, and predicting what you want to do next. But I think the most beautiful, most meaningful things is what happens here at DLD, that we are here, and actually we hear an idea we didn't think about, and that will actually change our life. And I think we want to make sure that stays.
Yeah.
Wow. Where's Reed Hastings? I mean, that's sort of like counter to the whole model of like Netflix, is that I don't have to think about what I'm clicking on next, right?
But is that the model of life you want? You don't have to think about it. Isn't it beautiful when you find a movie that you never thought it existed, and then that will change your life? In that thing, nobody will predict. So can
serendipity exist with big data?
Yeah, I think we need to make sure that. Well, I think it can, because big data potentially can actually enrich our life, can actually give us more choice. We want to make sure that we don't use big data in order to make our life poorer and less serendipitous.
Huh.
Yeah, and I think it's very right. I think it's about augmenting human intelligence, the reach, and it's not about narrowing you down. So, for example, this will seem very mundane, but when we deployed our system last year on this e-commerce website, suddenly we realized that clients were moving from a 20% discovery ratio of the catalog to 90%. Because we were helping them engineering serendipity, if you will, just like this conference is doing. It's engineering serendipity.
I'm curious what, the issue in my perspective with big data is that it benefits, it has a network effect and it benefits the largest companies. Yeah. Are there room for startups? Are there room for smaller players? Or is this something that only is going to improve the Google, Amazon, Facebook, maybe Uber at this point, Apple? I guess I'd put the telecom industry in there too, but I mean.
Yeah, it's not just the big internet companies that have all this data, also the telco companies. We have a lot of data, and also many other companies. And again, with more internet, with more things connected to the internet, we'll see even more data coming up, and we can make use of this data, as we just heard. And of course, also artificial intelligence will improve. So we will have more data. We will have better systems to analyze these data and to come up with. Better proposals, how we can benefit from it. I think that's the real big benefit. And the benefit does not only mean that I exactly know what is the next big idea or what is the next movie that I should view. No, I think it's all about efficiency. Look at smart home, smart city, what we can do. I think we can also only solve the issues that we foresee, also with a growing population on Earth, if we use these big data and these analyze and new methods of analysis to get real solutions.
Yeah, I wanted to just give some time for audience Q&A. I have more questions, but if anyone in the audience has one, do we have a mic? Is everyone ready for lunch?
Yeah.
Is there one over to the left?
Thank you. In this world where people own their data again, who helps them to understand what are the implications of me giving away my data to this application or that company or to that context? Because although this is a very tech-savvy crowd, I think the average person will find it very hard to figure out what kind of data do I own and what are the implications of my using them and giving them away.
That's a really good question.
I think it's a very good question, to be honest, and this is why I said we need this ethical debate about also the implications. Of course, if you look at the technology can only answer what could be done with the data. But what does it really mean for society? What does it really mean for you as a person living in this society? I think we need this kind of debate because it's when it comes to data and data privacy, it's something that needs to be accepted in a broader society to really make us as an industry able to use this data and to make really business model and new ecosystems out of it.
Yeah, maybe if you can add to that, Cedric Price was a great radical designer, thinker, architect. He used to say, technology is the answer, but what is the question? And I think sometimes we don't know. We really, today, for a lot of big data, we don't know exactly what the question is. So, that's not just for the layperson, but it's really for a lot of us. We need to discover what is the value in the data. So I think it will have to be something that has to go hand in hand.
It's insidious, that's the issue.
Yeah.
It's insidious, and so you do not know until you begin to pay attention to it. But by the time you've realized that somebody actually owns you, it's too late.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's the EU commissioner again. She brought this up yesterday, which is an interesting point. Kind of there's no exchange rate. I can't go online and say my data is worth this many euros. I mean, maybe we'll move to a place so there's a movement to get to that place where you can actually kind of quantify it, but it doesn't seem like there's a lot of momentum in that direction.
Yeah. I think the difficult thing is that also you cannot monetize the data per se. So basically, if both of us we go online, we share our data, it doesn't have too much value. But if the two of us plus another 300 million people, like on Facebook, we share our data, then that has much more value. So in a certain sense, it's not easy to think about that mechanism of how your data has a value. It has a value also based on the context in the other data you have there. Sure.
Well, let me add one thing. We are very much discussing the consumer space. Let's talk about the B2B space. There is a lot of data, for example, especially in Germany, if you look at production data. If we could combine all this production data and use your artificial intelligence tools to analyze this data, we could become much more efficient in the way we do, or companies could become much more efficient in the way they do business.
Yep.
So not just looking at the consumer space, I think, especially from German perspective, it will be very important to also look at the B2B business, and especially to what we call Industrie 4.0.
I think we have time for another question. We have one?
Hello, my name is Julia. I'm journalist and media trainer. I would like to come back to your point of trust from the consumer part. You say I should trust in the company, but how can you guarantee that my data is not used in a wrong way or in a way that is not of my interest? Because if someone is stealing something of me, like physically, I will see it, but I can never know what is done with my data. So I have the feeling that the trust is very hard to give.
Yeah.
How can you solve this problem?
I would also add to that, how can the security, right? Like how consumers know that their data is secure.
I think first of all we have to get data security comes first, because without data security, no data privacy. So let's start with data security. I think that is where we as companies we can show that we are safe, and this is what we are doing every day. You know, we have 47 million subscribers, customers in Germany, and you know, this is an issue we are dealing every second, every minute, every hour with. The second one is you talk about trust and confidence. I think trust and confidence is nothing that come overnight. Trust and confidence means you promise something, you deliver, you promise something, you deliver. And over time, you build trust and confidence. And this is why I said we need to start this debate. We have to have a public debate about these issues to build the fundament of trust. And then companies, you know, they have to improve in the way they promise and deliver. That's the only way. It's not just, you know, you have a nice, you have a nice leaflet and we tell you, we trust me. No, you will not, most probably.
Anyone else? Last question I didn't ask is, you know, what hardware is required for this future of big data and accelerating? Yeah, and how far behind are we on, as an industry here on the hardware side?
A lot of hardware. But the good thing is the world is connected now, so both at the IoT level, but also the compute level. So the good news here, someone said, or you said, how to transport people with 20% of the cars.
Yeah.
Well, at any given time in this world, only 15% of the hardware is computing. So you've got 85% of the world's compute that's idle. And so there is here a huge economies of scale. We're driving this actually through our networked AI, where we can harvest a lot of cycles and deliver massive insights, including to businesses. So there's a lot of hardware is required. Existing hardware is okay, but of course anything that's going to come forward, like quantum computing, for example, is going to be a good thing to have.
Yeah, and last question, Carlo, what's required? Your example basically requires that the city governments and a lot of cities are willing to share data and actually have the resources and infrastructure to do data sharing with private companies. I mean, how many cities are actually in that place right now?
Yeah, I think, thanks for asking that. And actually, if you look at the data, I started with the data from New York City, the taxi data. That's data that Mayor Bloomberg made initially accessible to everybody, to researchers. Mayor Bloomberg had a sign in his office that said, "In God we trust, everybody else bring data." And so one of the things he did while he was mayor in New York was actually make sure that people would share as much data as possible, especially government agencies. So the project we did, and all this work about sharing mobility in cities, starting with New York, started because Mayor Bloomberg thought that big open data was important, and forced or convinced the New York Taxi and Limousine Commission to make the data accessible to everyone.
So we just need Bloomberg to run for president, right? All right, thanks so much. We're out of time, but really, this is great. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.